Today, I'm joined by Alex Lamas, or should that be Sifu Lamas, as you're known on Instagram, Alex? Is that how you
Yeah.
prefer to be known?
No. I mean, I started the Sifu Lamas because I'm a Kung Fu instructor. That's my
Hmm.
profession. I started it originally as as like a advertisement for my Kung Fu business. I had a school back then.
Hmm.
Um, After COVID, the school got, nicked. And but I I started getting into the bond community over the COVID thing, and so it sort of transitioned to that. I worked hard for that title, so I've just said, you know what, I'm going to leave it.
So just in case anyone
Alex
doesn't,
is fine.
just in case, just in case anyone doesn't know, what is a Sifu?
It's like sensei in the Japanese karate. It just means teacher.
Yeah, I only
And
know that because of the Kung Fu Panda movies, if I'm
yeah,
brutally honest. That's where I
yeah,
learned that word from, and from yourself, of course. But I saw
yeah.
Kung Fu Panda first. Um,
Oh, okay.
we've known each other in terms of getting to know each other online for quite a long time. But this is actually unbelievably the first time we've ever had a proper like conversation, isn't it?
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
is so weird. So we've done a lot of communication via email as well because you've written
yeah.
some really, really great articles for the
Thank you.
007GB website, and there's one in the latest edition of the magazine as well. And I really enjoy reading your pieces. You describe yourself, you are a kung fu teacher. You also on your Instagram, I'm sure lots of people watching this already follow you anyway. But if you've never read the bio at the top, you also describe yourself as an amateur adventurer and a professional dilettante. So you can
Yeah.
just unpick those descriptors a little bit for us, Alex.
Oh man, that's a little bit of a joke, but I come from a rather can't really get into it with the time we have now, but a rather adventurous family. I traveled a lot as a young man in my teens and 20s. Got into a lot of trouble, around the world, so to speak. And I know a little bit about a lot of things, but you could say that you know, um, uh, what is it? What do they say? Yeah, that's what I say. Amateur, adventure, and dilettante. Like I said, I know a little bit
Yeah.
about a lot of things, but I don't. I
Okay.
only know a lot about one thing, and that's kung fu. Everything else, I'm just a complete dilettante. And I just dabble here and there.
I think we should probably add James Bond to the list of things you know a lot about.
There's people that know a lot more than I do. And
Okay.
probably,
Says the person whose YouTube name is Yes to Adventure,
yeah,
which is not,
yeah.
it's actually not a James Bond quote, is it? It's a quote from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but Ian Fleming was very
Yeah.
fond of saying that phrase.
Yeah. And
So
it's
if you
not even
can,
a quote. It's a paraphrase because he really said never say no to adventure.
that's it.
I
That's
wanted that was a double negative. I wanted to keep it positive. So I said, always say yes. So it's
yeah.
really paraphrasing.
If you've never been to Alex's YouTube, do head over there and also read Alex's articles as well. The theme that I always detect from your pieces, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong here, is you very much have a philosophy of if you're scared by something, go and do it.
Yeah,
Is that kind of
definitely.
that's kind of a credo you live by?
Yeah, even when I was in college, I wanted to do things that scared me. I got to be honest, as a kid, I probably lived with a lot of fear growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And fearful about some things and not fearful enough about other things. I grew up in New York City in the 1980s, and if you know anything about that time, it was absolutely insane. It was one of the highest crime rates in the city's history. I went to high school during the height. I wasn't as scared as I should have been.
Mm.
However, I was scared about a lot of other things. I was scared about um, being humiliated. I was scared of girls, but I had a lot of female friends. That's another story. But I, just had a lot of fears. One of the things that happened was when I was a kid, younger than that, I was bullied a lot. I first grew up in New York City in a place called Flushing, New York.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very diverse community. I mean, at that time, and still is, one of the most diverse places on planet Earth. It's about 400 languages are spoken in the borough of Queens in New York. And if you looked at my grammar school picture, that's like grades 1 through 4. You see every bit of humanity. I mean, people from everywhere. And this is going back into the 1970s. So, I mean, there were, South Asians, East Asians, Africans, African American, you name it, the humanity was in that school, and it was extremely diverse. Then we moved, and I can understand what my parents' thinking was. New York was falling apart. It was in the late 70s. There was a lot of drug use. There was a lot of crime. Just watch the movie The French Connection. That'll give you a clue what it was like. And so they decided to move kind of up to a place called Westchester, New York, rather posh area.
My husband, he's upstairs right now, I'm sure, listening to us recording this. My husband is immediately making a connection with X-Men, I imagine. So that's all I know about Westchester. Yeah.
Not far from
where the X-Men
the
live.
Xavier School for the Gifted, actually.
Yeah.
So we moved to this area, but I will tell you, it was lily white. These were children of IBMers, children of people on Wall Street. This was a very, 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 very white community. I mean, there were some Italians, there were some Jewish, but primarily it was extremely monolithic in that way. And I come there with kind of about 2 shades darker than everybody. I didn't really suffer any kind of outright racism that I could think of, that I could focus on, but I was small. I was small and I was dark and I was very different. And I was kind of weird because I was from New York City. And they just zeroed in on me. And I was pretty much assaulted every week that I was in school, in middle school. So I did grammar school in Flushing, New York. I did middle school in Westchester. I mean, I would have kids come up for no reason and just kick me right in the groin. Just out of the blue. I'd have kids push me down. I've had, knocking the books out. And on several occasions, out and out beatings. And on at least 4 or 5 occasions, I was just beaten within an inch of my life. And I remember one time that it was so bad, I was literally covered in blood. I'm sitting in the nurse's office. They called my parents, and my mom sees me, just my whole shirt is bloody. I have blood all over my, dry blood on my face and everything. And she just freaked out. So she pulled me out of there and she put me into a Taekwondo class. At the time, there wasn't a lot of martial arts schools going around. In Westchester, karate, Taekwondo was the thing. And so she found one that was close to where we were living. And she just said, I can't see you come home like this, every week being assaulted. And so I got into this martial art class. I only stayed in it for, let's say, a year, but this was also towards the end of my middle school. So we're talking about like the last year. And I do remember being attacked again and just doing a spinning back kick on this kid. And that was it. I was never touched again. Somehow the word got out, oh, he knows something now. And they left me. But by that time, I was done with the school. I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. So as a kid, and also there was stuff going on at home. So as well, so there was abuse at home. I don't want to get too into it, but there was abuse at the school. So I never really had a safe place during this time of, let's say, between ages around 9 to 12, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, between 9 and 12. I suffered a lot of violence in that period. And so, it does a number on your psyche, no doubt. It does a number on your sense of being, on who you are. Again, growing up smaller for my age than the other kids, it was very difficult. Also, let's add another thing to it. I was dyslexic. And I was undiagnosed dyslexic until I was, again, maybe the 2nd or 3rd year in my middle school. So for the first 2 years, I just thought I was an idiot because I couldn't keep up with the reading level of everybody else. So being brought up to the front of the class and being forced to write something was, a moment of abject terror for me. I was absolutely terrified. And I remember there were a few very unsympathetic teachers at that time who kind of reveled in public humiliation of children who didn't measure up. And I was one of them. And so, again, this was another layer of destroying my self-confidence, destroying my sense of who I am. When I got into that Taekwondo school and I was able to actually find some footing, pun intended, and then actually use it and just realize, oh my God, they saved me. It did click something in me to know that that was a path for me to go. But by that time, again, my self-confidence was shot. My sense of self-being. And it's very interesting. I want to bring this around back to Bond again. One of the things, when I look back, why was I into Bond? Of course, action adventure. I always loved action adventure films. I still love action adventure films. I still love anything to do with adventure. Was my favorite genre. But I think it was his self-confidence. I think it was the idea of somebody being that self-confident that really, wow, I wish I had that. I don't. But I wish that's very attractive. That's a very attractive trait. It's kind of funny talking about girls. I had a lot of female friends. I had no problem having female. I loved, having female friends. I love the fact that I did. My female friends to this day are some of the strongest friendships that I've ever had. But when it came to more romantic situations with them, it was all of a sudden, all my fears, all my trepidations, all my self-confidence just fell away. And I was just a mess. It was so hard for me to take that to the other, take like a friendship and turn it into something more romantic. If I was interested in a girl and I was attracted to him, it was very difficult for me. I managed to have but I didn't have a girlfriend in high school. I had nothing. I had no relationships in high school.
I also didn't have a girlfriend in high school, Alex, but that was for a different reason.
Yeah, boyfriend?
Not a boyfriend either, to be perfectly honest.
Oh, okay.
So much of what
I went to an arts high school, so we had openly gay kids, and I had friends that were openly gay, and so that wasn't a big in the 1980s, so it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, that was definitely not a thing when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s here in the UK. Yeah. No, there was not a single gay person out at the whole time that I was at school until like the last year or something, and there was one. Yeah, I mean, so much of what you've said, I just find we've obviously talked behind the scenes about quite a lot of that stuff before. I didn't know that you were actually dyslexic, and as soon as you said that, I was like, wow. I mean, considering you're such a great writer. If you weren't aware, both Alex and I were competing for Article of the Year in the Bond Community Awards last year. I believe it was quite
rightfully so. Rightfully so.
No. So it was your piece about Morocco, wasn't it? Which is a really, really great piece. So if you've not read that, check it out as well. But the fact that you're dyslexic and you're a writer, I find it really, as a teacher, someone in education myself, I find it really upsetting to hear other stories about bullying, because it's something I care so passionately about, and I have an absolutely zero tolerance of bullying. I mean, bullying, of course, happens. It happens in all schools. It happens sometimes in homes. It happens in workplaces. And any organization that says bullying doesn't happen is just turning a blind eye to it happening. I work tirelessly to make sure that the 7,000 plus children who I care for in my day job, that they're in safe environments where they can come forward and speak up. But you didn't really have that opportunity. I think in your article about learning Kung Fu, you said it was the 70s, so it was a boys will be boys attitude. It's like if someone bullied you, you just expected to get on with it. Yeah. In your case, you had no alternative, and I wouldn't advocate violence. If there are any children watching this, especially children I teach, I wouldn't advocate violence, if someone's bullying you. But in your situation, you just didn't have any choice, did you?
No, no. At the time, again, late 70s, I don't know how it is now. Their attitude was boys will be boys, and they just
Mm.
didn't want to do anything about it. They literally just they had no interest in solving that problem or
Mm.
thinking that this was an issue. And my mom was like, well, if they're not going to do something about it, we have to do something about it. And
Yeah.
that's why I went into now, I will say a little something to this. There is this idea that martial arts is advocating violence,
Yeah.
and I will want to refute that. If anything, martial arts advocates a peaceful resolution first,
Okay.
foremost. They, all martial arts, I don't care if it's Taekwondo, karate, Kung Fu, you name it, they are always advocating a peaceful resolution first.
Mm.
Defending yourself is always considered a last resort. Now,
Mm.
I've done karate, taekwondo, judo, but my primary interest, and I spent the past almost 30 years in Chinese martial arts, kung fu. Even the word, like the original word for kung fu is, well, kung fu means acquired skill, so it doesn't mean martial art. Martial art in Chinese is wushu. Wushu, as a character, it says martial art, but it's two characters put together. When you pull the characters apart, and say them individually, it means stop fighting,
Oh, wow.
end fighting, and it symbolizes like a fist holding and grabbing an arrow in midair.
Mm.
So the idea is that real martial art, the highest level, is when you don't have to fight, is to learn how to have enough self-confidence
Mm.
in yourself, not how to fight. Now, let's bring this into the self-confidence. Like I said, the bullying at home, the bullying at school, led for me to have almost zero self-confidence
Mm.
growing up.
Mm.
Um, and it also led to anxiety, depression, as well. My depression, I would say, was circumstantial, meaning it had to do with certain circumstances. It's not something that's chemical or ingrained. It
Okay.
was to certain periods in my life where I fell into a deep depression because of circumstances.
Yeah.
Anxiety, however, is something I still deal with. Anxiety is something that I had from then till like right now to this conversation. And that's a different story. When I was growing up, I had full-blown anxiety attacks,
Mm.
meaning that there would be situations where my heart would literally start going, and I would hold people and bring them their hand to my chest, and they would feel this. And they were like, "Oh my God, are you having a heart attack?" They were like, "Holy shit, I can't believe your heart's doing that." Because it's not going bum, 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 it's going brrrr, like that. And then I would start hyperventilating. I'd start getting dizzy. I'd have to sit down and I just and start breathing until it would pass, because it was literally like having 75 espressos,
Yeah.
the way my heart was going. And this would happen in periods of stress. And sometimes just random periods where I just all of a sudden my whole body would just go into this convulsion. And it wasn't until many years later, after it subsided, that a therapist said, I described what was going on. And at the time, and this happened up until my early 30s, I went to doctors. They, had, EKGs, and they said, oh, no, your heart's fine. I don't understand. I would prescribe to this to many doctors. They had no clue. They were like, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Finally, I went to a therapist about 5 or 6 years ago, and I go to therapy every once in a while if things get a little too
Yeah.
stressful. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Same here.
Um, and she's like, "Oh no, that was your anxiety attacks." And I'm like, "What? Oh no, you were having a full-blown anxiety attack." And I'm like, "Nobody ever told me." It's like, that's classic anxiety attack.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happened was I had these anxiety attacks since I was a kid up until my early 30s. And what was going on at that time is I had started my Kung Fu practice at around the age 29, around 2 to 3, maybe 3 years into my Kung Fu practice, they went away. I would have a few in the Kung Fu class, but eventually it stopped, never came back. And then with the same therapist, I said, you know, I noticed that they had stopped around 3 years into my Kung Fu practice. She goes, oh, that makes sense. And I said, why? Well, it's just the cure for anxiety attacks is exercise and meditation. Well, what is Kung Fu but a combination of exercise and meditation? I cured myself accidentally of anxiety attacks. Now, anxiety is a different story, but the anxiety attacks, the actual attacks, have never come back since I've been doing Kung Fu.
I was going to
And
say then, I was going to say none of us is, you know, as you well know, and probably a lot of people watching this know, I've very similar to you. I've had particularly two really circumstantial, really severe bouts of depression in my life, and also have battled anxiety my whole life. But the panic attacks for me have been a relatively recent thing in the last couple of years. And again, like you, as you were talking, I was like, God, this is so similar. It was seeing a counselor, a therapist who kind of made me recognize what was triggering these things. And I haven't had a proper, like, full-blown panic attack for at least a year and about a year and a half now, because of the coping strategies that I've, you know, that I've learned because of that. But yeah, I was interested because you said cure anxiety. I think that's a really interesting distinction, isn't it? You can't really cure anxiety, possibly because of the things we went through as children. Do you actually attribute the childhood trauma that you experienced to being the root cause of your anxiety?
I would say, yeah, that's a lot of it. I think some of it might have been inherited. My father has anxiety. His mother had anxiety. So there's a history of anxiety in that side of my family. My grandmother, I remember having anxiety attacks. My father would have some anxiety attacks. Definitely does deal with anxiety as well. You know, and now I manage anxiety, I
Yeah,
would say.
yeah.
I manage anxiety through the martial arts, through exercise, through meditation. Around the same time that I started my Kung Fu practice, I started getting into Buddhism and studying Buddhism. And that also, you know, essentially the Buddha was probably considered the first psychotherapist.
Oh, wow.
And Buddhism really has more to do with self-psychotherapy than it does have anything to do spiritually. I know there are levels where you can take it into a spiritual level, but in its core, in its core teachings, it really is a system of self-psychotherapy. It really has more to do with psychotherapy than it has to do with anything else,
I
because it's
didn't
about
realize.
understanding.
Wow.
Yeah, it's about understanding the mind, how the mind works, what are the mechanics of the mind, what are the mechanics of perception, how does perception work?
Mm.
And this was, discovered by Siddhartha Gautama, 2,500 years ago. He was taking his own mind apart
Wow.
through meditative practices. And when you get more into certain types of Buddhism, you can see that they have a very strong psychological component to the practice.
Do you think James Bond would benefit from learning some Buddhist practices? Because, you know, bringing this back to Bond, James Bond has clearly suffered childhood trauma, like so many of us have, or sometimes in the UK we call them adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah.
James Bond's are right up there, and I
Yeah.
think, you know, that colors a lot of the James Bond stories, particularly in the novels, implicitly a lot of the time. I know Skyfall deals very much with his origins and him hating his upbringing and all that side of things, which is actually when I end up writing quite personally about my childhood trauma, is when writing about those later Daniel Craig films in particular. But James Bond, as ever, probably doesn't cope with things in the best way. So would you advocate Buddhism for Bond?
Of course, it's a lot healthier than the drugs and alcohol.
I sense this is going to be a recurring theme in this series. We're only a couple of episodes in, and already I'm like, James Bond isn't the best at finding coping strategies, is he? But having said that, Fleming, certainly in the books, we do get insight into Bond's mind and his self-awareness. So he just
Yeah,
thinks about his thoughts a lot, and he calms him.
yeah.
You know, so I wouldn't go so far as saying he meditates or anything like that, but I think at least Bond kind of knows his own mind, I think.
Yeah, I was actually very surprised because I hadn't, again, being dyslexic, I kind of avoided the books for most of my life.
Mm.
It was during lockdown and David Zaritsky's Fleming Reading
Oh
Challenge
yeah,
that
yeah.
I decided to start reading them along with the, with them. And I was really surprised how three-dimensional James Bond really was, how
Mm.
deep he really was, how more of a real person he is in the books than he
Mm.
ever was portrayed in the films. I'm like, what? This is actually a guy who has fear.
Yeah.
He has doubt. He has self-doubt. He has, you know, anxieties, and he's
Hmm.
dealing with anxiety as like a real person. He's
Yeah.
not this kind of superhero that's portrayed on film. Now, the film is fun, but I did a fun podcast with a Quantum of History.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and we kind of dissected, is James Bond a psychopath?
I remember listening to that one now. Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember.
and we sort of decided that, yeah, Roger Moore was, because he was so flippant about everything. Less so Daniel Craig or Timothy Dalton, because they
Yes.
actually had some self-awareness about their issues.
Yeah, I think exactly. I think Roger Moore is just completely oblivious. Bless that. But we love Roger Moore in our house
I
from
love Roger.
it said. But you do think, is he aware of all the inadequacies he's trying to cover up here and all the self
Absolutely
doubt?
not.
No, not at all.
Not
No.
only is he not aware, he doesn't even care.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
But in reality, a person like that has to deal with a lot of,
Mm,
I'm sure there's a lot of psychotrauma that's going on,
yeah, yeah, I agree.
and dealing with it, like I said, one of the best ways that worked for me was Chinese martial arts, because there's a huge meditative aspect to it, because it's rooted in Chinese medicine, because it is exercise, which
Mm,
is very, very helpful, dealing with anxiety and depression. All those things. It saved my life.
mm.
It,
Yeah,
I would say that the martial arts, especially Kung Fu, saved my life
wow.
in many ways. And so I'm always a big advocate for it. So that's why, when they say, oh, it's promoting violence, no, it's not. It's
No,
promoting internal peace, if anything.
yeah.
Um, yeah, there's a violent aspect to it. You're learning how to kickbox.
Mm,
I mean, it's essentially kickboxing with some grappling involved. But, that's just a very surface level um, uh, understanding of it.
yeah.
Going much deeper. There's so many more deeper levels to it.
I obviously work with a lot of young people who have had quite a lot of, very severe childhood trauma, adverse childhood experiences. And we work really hard to try and make sure that they aren't defined by that, that
Mm,
it does, let's be honest, childhood trauma can completely ruin and even prematurely end lives. Um,
yeah,
and I just think that it's really important that we teach young people how to deal with
yeah,
with the experiences they've gone through. I mean, I don't know the figures, but I don't imagine there's I imagine that most people don't have a completely blissful, trauma-free childhood. Um, and I think it's really, really important that we, to use the language of Casino Royale, we arm children, to be able to deal with that trauma, whatever's happened to them,
yeah,
and to recognize it as well, because we don't want to be
yeah,
like Roger Moore and just go through life
yeah.
completely oblivious to why we're doing the things we're doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think discussions like this, being very open and honest about it. I mean, like I said, I had two bouts of very severe depression. One when I was very young, in my late teens, early 20s. I even could say that I had a suicide attempt
Yeah.
at that time, where it got that severe. I think my second bout of depression was due to an impending divorce from my first marriage, problems with employment, and it was just, the whole life was just sort of spiraling downward. And although I can't say that I did not have a suicide attempt, I definitely had suicidal thoughts at that time.
Mm-hmm.
What saved me the first time was listening to my family outside the door, and they were laughing and having fun. And I was like, I can't do that to them.
Mm.
As bad as I feel about myself, I couldn't let them deal with that. And it was like more about thinking about them and what they would have to deal than about myself. And sort of getting out of myself and saying, how would they feel about it if they, found my dead body? And I said, I can't do that to them. They're, this is not right. And that sort of saved me. The second time was literally just going back into my martial arts and going back into my kung fu, and my teacher, my sifu, who was just so instrumental in my life and developing me as a human being and as a well-functioning human being. He was an amazing person. Going back into those core principles also helped me from going too far. But again, the second one, I was more just thoughts, not an attempt. The first time was definitely an attempt.
And thank you for sharing that, Alex. I think, you and I have talked about this offline quite a bit. We both think it's really important. I had suicidal thoughts and came quite close actually to ending my own life in my early 20s during my worst bout of depression. And similar thoughts to you, really. It's about the impact of other people. Even in those really dark moments, I was still thinking about that. So I kind of still had that kind of lifeline in a sense. And it's never got as bad as it did in my early 20s since then. But I have wrestled suicidal thoughts subsequently. But I think it's really healthy for us to, and I know you think the same, for us to talk about these things, because we know that the biggest killer of men, of young men-ish. I'm not sure I would put myself in the young men bracket nowadays.
Not really.
The biggest killer of young men is still suicide. And
Really?
both of that in both it's in UK and USA, and both of our countries. And I think it's a really healthy conversation that we're having, and hopefully it kind of inspires other people to have that conversation. Not necessarily over Zoom or whatever, but with people who in their own lives. And sometimes it might be easier to have those conversations with people who aren't in the immediate family. But yeah, it is so important, isn't it?
It is. And one of the things that helped me was, all right, going back to the Buddhism, I read this book by Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a famous Vietnamese Zen master. And he wrote a book on anger, but he had some other teachings that were very interesting. You have to look at the depression, and especially those thoughts, as like a storm, like the weather. And if you think about the weather, there are sunny days, there are rainy days, and sometimes there's a storm. But no matter what, they're always going to pass. The sunny days will go into a rainy day, the storm will come, and then the storm goes away and the sun comes out again. And it's just sort of constantly reminding yourself that these thoughts, these ideas, these things are sort of like a brainstorm or an emotional storm. Really was helpful in understanding that this is not going to last.
Yeah.
It's going to get better. It's bad now, but it's not going to be bad tomorrow or the next day. The storm will pass. And having that sort of metaphor was, for me, I found very, very helpful in my life.
I think that's a really brilliant metaphor. When you're in the middle of the storm, certainly in my experience, it feels like it's never going to end. And there literally feels like there is no way out apart from to take your own life. But then I look back on those times now and I'm like, how did I get into that mental space? And it is amazing the power that the mind can have, that it actually takes you down that route where there is just no alternative. But the storms are few and far between now, unlike 15 years or so ago. But in a sense, this might sound a bit weird, but I'm almost glad I had those experiences, because I've got those to refer back to. So if I am going through a bad patch mentally, I can look back at those times and go, you've been through this storm before and it won't last forever. But the
Yeah.
first time that happens to people, and some
Mhm.
people it can be when they're really young. Sometimes, like me, it was in my late teens, early 20s,
Mhm.
kind of late teens for you as well. Your
Same
worst
time.
bout. Yeah. But some people, it hits much, much later in life. So in a
Mhm.
sense, I almost feel like, although I wouldn't wish it on anybody, I'm sort of glad it happened then because I know now I learned a lot from the experience about myself.
Mhm. Yeah, me too. And I would say that, it's not something that you're going to cure or you're going to end. It's all gone and you're all better and you're a fully functioning human being.
Mm.
It's something that takes time, practice, and vigilance. Therapy. I can't say how strong enough how much finding a good therapist. Now, therapy doesn't mean you're going to be in therapy forever.
No, no.
You can do therapy for the bad times or do
Yeah.
therapy. Like whenever I had a stressful situation, I had a very good friend of mine who was it was actually an ex-girlfriend, but years later I found out that she had committed suicide years after we had broken up. And it just snapped. I almost had a breakdown. It was a bad, and I went into therapy because I needed help.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't know how to deal with this. I never had somebody that I was that close to actually commit suicide in my life. And so I needed to go to a therapist to learn how to deal with it. And it was a wonderful experience in the sense that it really gave me another perspective on that whole situation and understanding it. Dealing with issues with my parents that had gotten very out of nothing to do with me. It was the two of them. But it got out of hand, and I needed to learn how do I talk to how do I have a relationship with these
Mhm.
people again? How do I want to have a good relationship with my parents. I can't right now, but I want that. So I went into therapy to learn how to do that. And right now, I have a very good relationship with both of them. That wasn't always the case.
Yeah.
Even when I was a kid, as a young kid, I went into therapy. In high school, I went into therapy. And again, these weren't permanent things. These were like, I'm having trouble now, so I need help now. And then I know when when it's time to go because I start repeating myself. I get sick of the sound of myself. I'm like, what am I saying? I'm really tired of hearing myself talk. And I'm like, you know what? I think we're good for now. We'll see what happens later on. And
I'm the
so when I get
same. I've gone for concentrated periods. And every so often I found a really, really good therapist when I went through a really horrendous bout of anxiety about 2.5 years ago. And I've still got his number in my phone. And occasionally I'll just message him just to say, I'm still okay. I feel like sometimes because when sometimes I think people are like if I stopped seeing my therapist and I felt really guilty in a way because I'm just like I'm not going any longer, and he's a really nice guy and he was just nice to chat to be honest. uh,
Yeah.
but I just disappeared one day and didn't come back, and I thought therapists must have this happen all the time.
Oh
So
yeah, sure.
I do drop him the occasional text just to say, just letting you know I'm still okay, but
That's
if I ever
good.
need to again, I'll be back. He
Yeah.
always quite a cheery message back as well.
Yeah. So like I said, therapy, yeah, I don't want people to be intimidated by therapy. It
No.
doesn't have to be forever. It could be just until you get over whatever hump you need to get over.
Mm.
The other thing is finding practice of things like meditation, exercise, something that takes you out of yourself, takes you out of your volunteering for an organization or
Yeah.
whatever. Something that gets you out of your own ego.
I
Uh,
I've never managed meditation. I'm not sure. I'm sure you could train me, Alex. But my brain is too kind of like firing in so many different directions. I find it very difficult to do. I've done mindfulness courses, I've done all the rest. I just find it so difficult to do that. But
uh,
certainly the exercise. I
yeah.
didn't do any exercise until my early 20s. And that was
Mm,
a game changer. And that was one of the things that helped bring me out of depression, actually. And it was the confidence that came with that as well, because I was always quite overweight when I was growing up,
mm.
as a teenager and into my early 20s as well. So losing a couple of stone in weight kind of gave me a more body confidence as well. So very much tying in with what you've said.
Yeah. Well, let me just the thing about meditation. A lot of people think meditation is stopping your thought or controlling your thoughts or anything like that. That's not it.
Okay.
It's a misconception of
Teach me,
meditation.
Sifu.
Very quickly, not to get too deep into it, but you have to think about meditation. If your minds are going over, that's fine. You can meditate with your mind going crazy.
Okay.
That's not the problem. Think of your thoughts of like a river, right? Most of us are in the river getting carried away from the river. The only difference between meditation and regular thought is that you crawl out of the river and you watch your thoughts going by. Now, your thoughts can be going crazy. They can be going a mile a minute. But if you're aware that they are, you're meditating.
Okay.
Meditating just means you're aware of the thought. Doesn't mean what the thought is. Doesn't mean that you're not thinking. It doesn't mean you can't stop thought. Then mean you'd be dead. You're always going to be thinking something. Yeah. It's just being aware. It's having this level of awareness saying, oh, I'm thinking about these things, as opposed to, blah, 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 right? It's just saying, oh, these things are happening, but you're watching it like you're watching television.
I do that. So it turns out I've been meditating all along without realizing it, because I think I am very self-aware. I do constantly, probably too much actually, kind of question my thoughts, but and then just kind of go, I know why I'm feeling. So if I have a bad night's sleep, I'll feel quite anxious. Tell me if this is meditation. I'll feel quite anxious the next day because I've missed out on sleep. And we know that has a massive impact on being anxious. So I'll kind of be driving to work and I'll feel, why am I feeling this way? And I'll just like, I know why I'm feeling this way. I feel this way because I haven't had a good night's sleep. And it's perfectly fine to feel all over the place. You know what you're doing, and it's kind of, so is that kind of stepping back? Would that count as meditation?
Yeah, because meditation literally is developing awareness. It's not stopping your mind. It's not stopping your thought. It's developing awareness of your thoughts, of your mind, of your body. Okay. It's developing an awareness of what's going on inside and out, and just honing that skill of awareness is what meditation really is. It has nothing to do with thinking or not thinking. Okay. It has everything to do with the how aware are you? And that's what it really, so if you're having that thing, because listen, I've had bad bouts of insomnia where, and there was a time back in the, not that long ago, I was up for 3 days straight. And maybe the fourth day I got 2 or 3 hours, sleep. And so, trust me, I know about insomnia. Something I've kind of also struggled is part of the anxiety where I've struggled with all my life.
I think we need to do a whole separate video on insomnia, because that's
I'm not going to get too into it.
I connect with that, and I know James Bond. There's a lot of there's a lot of stuff to say about James Bond and lack of sleep. Definitely, we'll do that. We'll do that another time.
We'll do that another time, and I can do a whole thing on insomnia.
Oh, yes, please. That'd be great.
You get very deep into it and what solves it and what causes it and everything. So every day is a process. Every day is sort of another day of learning how to, to function with these things, and giving yourself a break and saying, this is where I am now and it's fine. It's good, And I have to tell you, this has been an amazing pleasure talking to you, David.
Oh, thank you.
I can't wait for the next one.
Me either.